Hey y'all, and welcome back to UpliftFit Nutrition Radio. I'm your host, Lacey Dunn, Senior Dietetic Student and future Registered Dietitian, here to spread the scientific knowledge in the worlds of fitness and nutrition. Today we are going to dive in on intermittent fasting, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Let's get started. So the best way for me to describe intermittent fasting is by describing it as an eating pattern. Intermittent fasting is not a specific diet. It is just a way of eating. So with intermittent fasting, you have both a feeding window and a fasting window. And there is no right way to do intermittent fasting. So there are different varieties of fasting and feeding windows that you can do with this method. The most well-known method for intermittent fasting would be a 16-hour feeding window and an 8-hour fasting window. There are also various different methods such as alternate day fasting or even consecutive day fasting. First, I need to state that with intermittent fasting, there are various research studies done that both say that it is positive for body composition change or that there is no body composition change versus a normal linear diet pattern. So it's just conflicting, and you really have to read the research. And if you go into my other podcast and you listen to about how to interpret research, you will better understand that it's just it's hard to come to a conclusion on one method being better than the other. So my feels are by stating that intermittent fasting is only better if it makes you stick to your diet better than a normal diet pattern. There is hands down research that intermittent fasting can be potentially a tool for longevity and increasing your lifespan. I just did an article for Train Magazine on that, so look for that soon coming out. I don't know exactly when, but so there's definitely evidence to that happening. But in regards to body composition change, there is conflicting evidence. There are many amazing benefits that intermittent fasting can have, such as decreasing insulin sensitivity, increasing fat mobilization, and decreasing blood lipid levels, which these are many factors to chronic disease. There is a study specifically done by Manuel et al., which was doing a 5-day cycle of fasting, and it showed a safe and effective way to reduce the markers of aging and age-related disease, such as blood pressure, fasting glucose, IGF-1, triglycerides, and C-reactive protein. So this essentially means that intermittent fasting, like I had said a little bit earlier, could potentially be used as a way to reduce your risk for chronic disease and increase your lifespan. One of the top benefits of intermittent fasting is enhancing insulin sensitivity. In a healthy individual, in response to a carbohydrate meal and when your blood glucose levels spike, your pancreas secretes a hormone insulin. It helps the cells in your body absorb the glucose for energy. With the uptake of the glucose from your bloodstream by the insulin, then your blood glucose levels go back to normal. Now, in an individual who is insulin resistant or cannot make their own insulin, that means that the blood glucose stays high and the glucose stays in your bloodstream, which leads to highly detrimental effects. So the good thing about intermittent fasting is that it increases insulin sensitivity, which means increases the sensitivity that your cells have to take up glucose. What you don't want is insulin resistance, which is when your body does not respond to the insulin to take up the glucose. And then you have a high blood sugar, which can cause type 2 diabetes and prediabetes and various other chronic conditions. I have gone over a little bit of the benefits of intermittent fasting, and I asked some questions on Twitter, so I'm going to dive into those after I state one more time that intermittent fasting is better if it is easier and more convenient for you to stick to the diet. So intermittent fasting is a tool to use. It is an eating pattern, and if it makes you lose weight by being able to stick to it or eat less calories, because that is how you lose weight, a caloric deficit, then that makes it the better diet. Intermittent fasting is not the sole answer to your problems or to your weight loss. It is not the magic pill, the magic method. It is just a method and a tool that you can use. Now, there are things you have to consider with intermittent fasting, such as food or beverages you have in your fasting window, and that was one of the questions that I got on Twitter. You don't have to worry about drinking your coffee in the morning with like maybe a few Splendas or Equal or Stevia. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about if you have a 0-calorie beverage. But what you do have to worry about is if you have multiple 0-calorie beverages, multiple Splenda packets, and I'm talking like excessive, like if you have 3 or 4 0-calorie drinks. You don't have to worry about your branched chain amino acids. You can take those. You're not going to be pulling yourself out of the fasting quote unquote window. So just make sure that when you are looking at the nutrition facts of a drink that you may be having, you want to make sure that you look at the sugar alcohols, because some sugar alcohols do elicit a response in regards to blood glucose. Often you implement intermittent fasting is up to you. Like I said, there are very different methods to doing it. You can do alternative day, you can do it every single day, or you can do it every other week. It is totally up to you. The obvious question is, when do I train with intermittent fasting? So a lot of people like to train fed, and it's individual by individual basis. So for me, I love training fed. So I make sure that in my feeding window, I am training. I don't like to train fasted, but if I am in my fasted window, then I just drink 2 scoops of BE Science branched chain amino acids, and then I drink some caffeine and I get it done. But you can train fasted. You're not going to lose muscle by training fasted, but you do want to make sure that if you train fasted, you get in a meal within the next 2 hours. It is going to be obviously overall protein during the day that determines whether you lose muscle. But for me, my feels are that in order to fully stimulate muscle protein synthesis, you want to make sure that you get that protein in at least around 2 hours post-workout. So in regards to when should you train, it's up to you and your schedule. I know it's different for a lot of people, but intermittent fasting might not be the best for you if you train super in the morning and then you want to break your fast at 1 p.m. It just might not be for you. If you are a woman, and a lot of my followers are women, then you want to make sure, if you want to do intermittent fasting, that you have a doctor on duty or you have your hormones checked throughout doing this type of method of dieting, because intermittent fasting can potentially lead to amenorrhea, which is loss of the menstrual cycle, and that is very unhealthy, and that is something you do not want to do. Now, also, I do want to note that you can lose your menstrual cycle just by taking any food group out. So a lot of women don't realize that also doing a super low carb diet can cause amenorrhea. So this is just me to say, be safe, have your hormones checked throughout intermittent fasting, or really always have your hormones checked every few months just to make sure everything's okay. Quick note too, from personal experience, be careful with taking supplements and medications with intermittent fasting. If you have a multivitamin, make sure you wait and take that with food, because if you don't, it can make you nauseous. And I know a lot of a lot of medicines actually need food too. So you really want to make sure that you do not cause anything. So make sure you are reading your labels and you take your medicines or supplements with food when necessary. I know some people may be thinking, now what about gaining muscle on intermittent fasting? Well, studies have shown that with sufficient protein intake present, along with resistance training, loss of lean muscle tissue does not pose a problem. So that being said, I also think that intermittent fasting is not the best tool for gaining muscle because you want to be able to fully maximize muscle protein synthesis, but I still use intermittent fasting. So just because it's not the best tool does not mean you can't use it. If you are just getting started into intermittent fasting, you really have to make sure that you don't go head in and dive straight into it. You really want to make sure that you go slow and steady. So start with alternate day fasting. That's what I did. And then you have to make sure that you realize that you're not going to be used to the fasting feel. So fasting, sometimes you can have kind of a cloudy head, and this is due to no carbohydrates. So your body has to get used to the fasting brain. It has to get used to fasting because as humans, we aren't made essentially to always be fed, but we weren't made either always to be fasting. So your body has to adjust, and the body is amazing and it will adjust, but you cannot expect perfection the first days that you do it. Now, the reason that intermittent fasting can be seen as a magic tool for weight loss, which it is not a magic tool, but the reason it can be seen that way is because fasting increases the growth hormone in your body, which can help boost muscle, and it also increases your insulin sensitivity, which can enhance weight loss. So that is one reason why you see it as a magic tool, and it can be seen with helping with adherence. So adherence is the key factor to sticking to a diet. Regardless if you choose to do intermittent fasting, if you choose to go out and do a meal plan versus macros, carb cycling versus linear cycling, whatever you choose to do regarding your diet, if it makes you happy and keeps you healthy and you are very consistent with it, that is going to be the diet tool for you. If you are a beginner with intermittent fasting, again, I suggest you go slow. I don't suggest you start with a 16-hour 8-hour window. Maybe try doing a 10 or 12-hour feeding window, and so a 12-hour feeding window would be a 12-hour fasting window. Make sure you go slow and steady, find what works for you, and play with it because everybody is different. There are no specific rigid rules. The research is slim. So don't be afraid to go do an 8-hour window one day, 10-hour window the next day, and then another day go back to an 8-hour window. Just play with it, figure out what helps you and what works for you. I'm going to end the podcast on intermittent fasting here. I hope I was able to describe it and not make it too confusing. I hope I was able to tell you guys about the benefits, the contradictions of this diet, and ways that you can implement it safely into your life. Make sure you subscribe to both my YouTube channel and you follow me on Instagram at Faith and Fit and my Twitter at Lacey A. Dunn. And shoot me, tweet me, Instagram comment me, YouTube comment me what you want to hear, what you want to learn about on this podcast, and I will make it happen. Thank you so much again for listening, and I hope to have you back soon. You have been listening to UpliftFit Nutrition Radio with Lacey Dunn.